Episode 1. You're not starting from scratch. You're rebuilding with fire. It may look like ruins, the broken systems, the fractured trust, the scattered stones, where temples once stood. And you might be tempted to say, there's nothing left. But heaven leans low and answers, there's everything left, because you're not starting from scratch. You're rebuilding with fire. This isn't the kind of fire that destroys. This is the kind that defines, the kind that says, what survived the burn is what was always real. You don't need blueprints. You are the blueprint now, carved by flame, marked by mercy, stamped with survival. This time, you don't build for approval. You build from alignment. This time, you don't reach for applause. You reach for integrity. This time, you don't construct from pressure. You build from presence. The ashes around you aren't your shame. They're your soil. They're the place where glory grows again. Honest this time. Holy this time. Heavy enough to stay. You're not empty-handed. You carry the spark. The one that doesn't flicker. For show. The one that burns slow and true. Because it remembers what it cost to keep it alive. You've been through the teardown. You've lived the silence. You've stood in the aftermath and said, still I will stay. And because you stayed, you're trusted to build. Not just rebuild what was, but rebuild what never should have been missing. Altars without ego. Houses without compromise. Spaces where God doesn't visit. He dwells. You don't need validation. You need vision. And vision has returned. Clothed in fire. Dressed in dust. Burning with a clarity that cannot be unlearned. You're not guessing anymore. You know what doesn't last. And now you build from the deepest knowing. The presence must remain, or we start again. So you'll build slow. You'll build clean. You will build like someone who isn't in a rush, because you finally know what's worth waiting for. You're not starting from scratch. You're rebuilding with fire. And what comes from this won't just shine. It will stay standing. When everything else burns again. Episode 2. You're not building for crowds. You're rebuilding for glory. This time, you're not counting heads. You're counting clouds. You're not watching metrics. You're watching movements of presence. You're not asking, did they show up? You're asking, did he stay? Because you've seen what it's like to build for crowds. The pressure, the polish, the performance, and you watch the crowds come and go and come again, but never remain. You've learned the hard way. Crowds don't host glory. Only consecrated space does. So this time, you're rebuilding for a different guest, and he's not impressed by your aesthetics. He's looking for altars, for integrity, for purity over popularity. This isn't about how many follow. This is about whether God walks in the room and finds it safe to stay, because you've had enough of buildings without breath, rooms with sound but no substance. You've had enough of fast growth with shallow roots, of moments that sparkle and disappear by morning. You're done with empty fire. Now you're rebuilding. For wait, for rest, for residents. Let them build their towers. You'll build a tent, one that moves when he moves, one that bends when he whispers, one that says, we don't need more seats. We need more stillness. You're not rebuilding for momentum. You're rebuilding for meeting place. A place where heaven kisses earth, where presence hovers heavy, where angels recognize the atmosphere and linger longer than scheduled. You won't build with noise. You'll build with obedience. You won't decorate with trends. You'll decorate with truth. You won't fill the house for show. You'll clear the room for glory, because the remnant isn't hungry for events. We're hungry for encounters, and encounters don't need a crowd. They just need a vessel, a voice, a yes, a space untainted by ambition. You are not rebuilding to be impressive. You are rebuilding to be inhabited, and that requires something deeper, slower, purer, holier. You're not building for crowds. You're rebuilding for glory. And when glory comes, it doesn't need a program. It just needs someone who will say, This place belongs to you. Episode 3. You're not rebuilding to be seen. You're rebuilding what was never supposed to fall. You didn't ask for this. This burden, this blueprint, this ache to restore, what others walked away from. But here you are, walking among ruins, with a holy memory in your chest, a memory of what once was, or what should have been, or what still could be. You're not rebuilding to be recognized. You're not trying to bring it back. You're rebuilding what was never supposed to fall. And you're doing it for his name, not yours. Because deep down, you've always known this wasn't just poor stewardship. This was sacred betrayal. Altars traded for influence, oil replaced by image, presence replaced by performance. And now, you stand among the ashes, with fire in your bones, and tears in your eyes, not because of what was lost, but because you still believe in what can be rebuilt. You're not chasing nostalgia. You're chasing redemption. This isn't about recreating history. This is about finishing what was started before it got corrupted. You were called not to restore brick for brick, but to resurrect the breath inside the bricks, to call back the weight, to call back the glory, to call back the presence that should have never been pushed out. This isn't about platforms. This is about priesthood. This isn't about revival in name. This is about rescue in spirit. You're rebuilding the forgotten places, the hidden ones, the places where glory once dwelled and will again, because you said yes. And your yes is costly, because to rebuild what was holy, you have to walk where it was profaned, to touch again what was mishandled, to believe again where others mocked, to kneel down and redig wells others passed over as old wine. You're not doing this to be honored. You're doing it because you still believe he's worthy. You still believe his presence deserves a house, not made by ambition, but by adoration. And so you rebuild with reverence, with quiet hands, with sacred resolve, with a heart that whispers, this wasn't supposed to fall, but as long as I'm alive, it won't stay down. You're not rebuilding to be seen. You're rebuilding what was never supposed to fall. And that kind of rebuilding doesn't make headlines. It makes history. Episode 4. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces where God still speaks. This is not about walls, or stages, or lights, or what looks impressive on paper. This is deeper. This is quieter. This is sacred. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces. And not just any space. The kind where God still speaks. Where breath becomes invitation. Where silence isn't awkward. It's holy. Where the air feels weighty. Because heaven hasn't left the room. You've seen what happens when we build too fast. Too loud. Too much for them. Not enough for him. And now you're done with empty buildings. Filled with busy people who forgot what it's like to recognize the whisper. So you're rebuilding, not with steel and stone, but with stillness and surrender. You're not designing for programs. You're cultivating presence. This is what the remnant rebuilds. Rooms, not for performance, but for encounter. Tables, not for branding, but for breaking bread. Corners, not for decoration, but for kneeling again. You've come to understand what was lost wasn't just purity. It was a pause. The hush that comes when hearts remember God is in the room, not as concept, but as person, not as guest, but as owner. So you rebuild with a different blueprint, not one made by architects, but by intercessors, not one mapped in diagrams, but in tears. You rebuild slow, on purpose, with prayer in your bones and honor in your hands, because what you're making isn't meant to house people. It's meant to host God. And when he comes, and he will, you won't rush to move on. You'll stay because you made space. And space is the new oil. Space is the altar. Space is the one thing we forgot how to protect. But you remembered. You're not rebuilding for eyes. You're rebuilding for ears that long to hear. What they forgot was still possible. This is the place where he still speaks. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces where God still speaks. And one whisper in that space will do more than 1,000 well-built strategies. Episode 4. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces where God still speaks. This is not about walls, or stages, or lights, or what looks impressive on paper. This is deeper. This is quieter. This is sacred. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces. And not just any space. The kind where God still speaks. Where breath becomes invitation. Where silence isn't awkward. It's holy. Where the air feels weighty. Because heaven hasn't left the room. You've seen what happens when we build too fast. Too loud. Too much for them. Not enough for him. And now you're done with empty buildings. Filled with busy people who forgot what it's like to recognize the whisper. So you're rebuilding, not with steel and stone, but with stillness and surrender. You're not designing for programs. You're cultivating presence. This is what the remnant rebuilds. Rooms, not for performance, but for encounter. Tables, not for branding, but for breaking bread. Corners, not for decoration, but for kneeling again. You've come to understand what was lost wasn't just purity. It was a pause. The hush that comes when hearts remember God is in the room, not as concept, but as person, not as guest, but as owner. So you rebuild with a different blueprint, not one made by architects, but by intercessors, not one mapped in diagrams, but in tears. You rebuild slow, on purpose, with prayer in your bones and honor in your hands, because what you're making isn't meant to house people. It's meant to host God. And when he comes, and he will, you won't rush to move on. You'll stay because you made space, and space is the new oil. Space is the altar. Space is the one thing we forgot how to protect. But you remembered. You're not rebuilding for eyes. You're rebuilding for ears that long to hear. What they forgot was still possible. This is the place where he still speaks. You're not rebuilding structures. You're rebuilding spaces where God still speaks. And one whisper in that space will do more than 1,000 well-built strategies. Episode 5. You're not building for speed. You're building for stay. This isn't a race. This is a restoration. This isn't a sprint to finish. This is a call to remain. You're not building to launch. You're building to last. You're not building to impress. You're building so God can stay. Because what's built fast can fall fast. What's built loud can fade loud. But what's built slowly, with oil, with reverence, with presence as a blueprint, endures. You're not chasing momentum. You're cultivating atmosphere. You're not rushing a reveal. You're laying foundations that don't crack under weight. Because the goal isn't to open the doors. It's to make sure he still wants to walk through them again and again. He doesn't rush. So why should you? He never asked for polished. He asked for pure. And purity can't be microwaved. It must be marinated, tested in silence, formed in waiting. You're building like someone who knows what happens when we move too fast, when we chase fruit and forget the root, when we light fires that aren't sustainable and call it revival, but never learn to tend the flame. So now you move slow, not out of fear of the Lord. You move with hands that tremble, not because you're unsure, but because you're clear. This must stay holy. This must stay his. You're not here for the rush. You're here for the rest, not for fireworks, but for the long burn, not for launch day, but for legacy. Because what you're building isn't just for you. It's for the ones coming after. And if you rush it now, they'll inherit a house without presence. But if you build it slow, brick by obedient brick, they'll inherit a dwelling place where God still lingers. You're not building for speed. You're building for stay. And what stays is what carries the glory. Not what's fast, not what's loud, but what's faithful. Episode 6. You're not building for fame. You're building what carries his name. You could have taken the credit. You could have chased the spotlight. You could have branded your name onto what you survived, and no one would have blamed you. But something in you whispered, if it doesn't carry his name, it's not worth building. And so you stayed small, you stayed silent, you stayed surrendered, because you knew you're not building for fame. You're building what carries his name, and that name is the only one worthy. Fame fades, but his name endures. Trends come and go, but his name still shakes rooms. Without sound systems, without graphics, without applause, you've seen what happens when movements bear the wrong name, when ministries become monuments to men, when buildings are full, but the spirit has left. So now you build differently, not bigger, but truer, not to be known, but to make him known. This house you're raising, it won't carry your initials. It will carry incense. It won't echo your message. It will echo the word that never returns void. You're not here to be remembered. You're here to host the eternal. And when it's all said and done, when voices fade, when names are forgotten, when history rewrites itself again, let there still be an altar with his name engraved in fire, because you said, this one belongs to you. You don't need your name on a sign. You need his presence in the room, because presence without credit is better than credit without presence. They'll ask, who built this? Let them wonder. Let the only answer be felt in the weight of the air, the trembling in the bones, the way silence grows heavy. With a holiness no man can manufacture, you're not chasing legacy. You're becoming a vessel. You're not drafting a future with your face on it. You're planting a future soaked in reverence. And reverence is what carries glory, not charisma. You're not building a brand. You're rebuilding a burning place, where the only name that echoes is the one who split time, walked in dust, and never needed fame to finish the mission. You're not building for fame. You're building what carries his name. And because of that, he will dwell there. And that is all you've ever wanted. Episode 7. You're not rebuilding to be admired. You're rebuilding what remains after fire. They'll admire the outcome, the beauty, the sacred simplicity, the presence that rests on the walls like breath. But they won't see the ashes under your fingernails, the nights you spent asking heaven if anything was worth salvaging, the days you walked alone through charred spaces, sifting through the wreckage of what once looked holy. You're not rebuilding to be admired. You're rebuilding what remains after fire, because fire always reveals what flattery can't. You don't trust the surface anymore. You trust what survived the burning. You trust what stayed when the applause stopped, what breathed after the systems crumbled, what still whispered. Yes, when every other voice went silent. You've seen the false gold melt. You've seen the empty frames fall. You've seen leaders run from a flame, while God hid inside it. So now you build slow, and you build deep, because what you're rebuilding must survive the next fire. 2. This isn't for the eyes of man. It's for the weight of God. This isn't to impress. It's to inhabit. You're not looking for validation. You're looking for the veil to thicken again, for the air to change, because glory decided to return. And that means building with stones that have been tested, hearts that have been pressed, voices that have cracked but never lied. It means building with tears, not trends, with trembling, not techniques, because the next move of God won't rest on polished platforms. It will settle on proven people, people who didn't run from the fire, but walked through it holding on to truth. When truth costs everything, you're not rebuilding a replica. You're resurrecting what never should have died, and it won't look the same, but it will hold the weight. You're not here to be admired. You're here to recover what the fire couldn't kill, to take what remained in the flame, and build a home for it. So it doesn't just flicker in memory, but burns again with purpose. Let them praise you, or not. Let them watch, or walk away. You're not here for eyes. You're here for substance. You're here for what survives the shaking. What doesn't bow to culture? What still stands when the dust settles and only holy ground remains? You're not rebuilding to be admired. You're rebuilding what remains after fire. And what remains is what God trusts to carry his glory next. Episode 8. You're not building to finish fast. You're building to finish faithful. You've seen them sprint. Start strong. Shine bright. Burn loud. But you've also seen how fast that kind of fire dies. How quickly momentum becomes memory. How easy it is to begin with God and forget to end with him. So you made a decision. You won't rush to finish. You'll walk to remain. You won't build for a launch date. You'll build for a lasting impact. You won't measure by how soon it's done. You'll measure by how long it holds his presence. Because in a world that honors fast results, heaven honors faithful finishes. You're not here for headlines. You're here for heritage. Not to impress with early victories, but to endure through quiet obedience. There's a kind of builder who keeps showing up when no one's clapping, when no one's posting, when no one's validating the process. And yet still, they carry each stone like it's holy. Still pray over every nail. Still pause and ask, is this pleasing to you? That's who you become. Not perfect, but present. Not fast, but faithful. Because the finish line isn't applause. It's alignment. It's standing before him and hearing, well done, not because you finished first, but because you didn't quit when it was hard. You're not building something that trends. You're building something that trains others. How to love God with the long view. How to remain steady when everyone else is chasing what's next. How to be found still tending the altar long after the music stops. Let others race for relevance. You'll plan for revival. Let others sprint toward platform. You'll kneel toward presence. Because you know, a fast finish doesn't always mean a faithful one, but a faithful finish is never forgotten by heaven. So no, you don't need to finish first. You need to finish faithful, with oil still burning, with truth still in your mouth, with his name still on your altar, with your heart still soft, your knees still bent, your hands still open. You're not building to finish fast. You're building to finish faithful. And that kind of finish is what turns ashes into altars for generations yet to come. Episode 9. You're not building for the stage. You're building for the secret place. You've been around the lights, the applause, the carefully crafted moments. And somewhere along the way, you realize this is where he stays. The stage may attract eyes, but the secret place attracts presence. So you left the noise. You stepped behind the curtain. You laid down what could be seen to rebuild what could be sacred. Because what good is it if the world sees you, but heaven can't rest in what you built? You're not building for visibility. You're building for intimacy. You're not arranging chairs. You're arranging atmospheres, not for crowds, but for the cloud. The secret place isn't glamorous. It's glorious. It's not loud. It's lingering. It's not filled with affirmation. It's filled with alignment. You've learned the truest altars are the ones no one else walks into. But God comes anyway. The holiest rooms have no audience, but every answer. This is what rebuilding looks like now. Not platforms, but prayer floors. Not stages, but stillness. Not performance, but presence. You don't need a spotlight to know he's near. You just need a room where no one's watching, but heaven is listening. And you've made that room every surrendered morning, every quiet evening, every unseen yes when no one was clapping. And yet angels took notice. You are not rebuilding to be admired. You are rebuilding to be available, to be a sanctuary, a dwelling place, a soul that stays soft when the world goes cold. And this time, you're not asking, did they show up? You're asking, did he draw near? And when he does, you won't move on. You'll fall low, because the secret place isn't where you perform. It's where you become. You're not building for the stage. You're building for the secret place. And in that place, he doesn't just visit. He abides. And what abides with him becomes holy forever. Episode 10. You're not building to be remembered. You're building so he's not forgotten. You never asked for legacy. You asked for presence. You never longed for monuments. You longed for a place where he could dwell. And now, after all the bricks, the prayers, the silent nights, the costly yes that no one saw, you finally see it. You weren't building to be remembered. You were building so he's not forgotten. Because we live in a world that remembers talent, but forgets truth, that celebrates charisma, but forgets the cloud, that rushes to build stages, but forgets the altar. And you chose the altar. You chose the long road, the quiet obedience, the path where your name fades, but his name fills the room. You chose to make something, not so they would say, look what she did, but so they would say, surely God is here. This is what rebuilding was always about. Not revival events, not viral moments, not brand recognition, but sacred remembrance, creating spaces, systems, stories, where he is honored again, where his name is lifted above all others, where his voice is still the loudest in the room. You're not chasing impact. You're carrying intercession. You're not leaving behind your image. You're leaving behind a pattern of holiness, a blueprint that says, here is how we make room. Here is how we stay low. Here is how we build something, where God doesn't just visit, he rests. Because long after your name is spoken last, what you built in him will still be whispering his name. The walls may crack, the paint may fade, but the glory will linger, because it was for him from the beginning. And heaven will remember. Heaven always remembers what was built for his heart, not human hands. Let others write history. You wrote honor. Let others chase legacy. You carried the lamb. And in the end, that's what will matter most. You're not building to be remembered. You're building so he's not forgotten. And because of that, your altar will outlive your story. And your obedience will echo long after you're gone.